Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our next installment on the Cold War. And we are back in Berlin again. So, Berlin remembers what we call a trouble spot for the Cold War. It was a place that kept causing them trouble, they kept coming back to. And what we're going to look at in this lesson, what was the Berlin Wall and what was its impact on the Cold War and on the people in Berlin? So, first up, we're going to pause the video in a minute and you're just going to do a bit of a recap. What's been going on with Berlin so far? Go all the way back to the start of the Cold War. Okay, so the sort of things that you should be saying, the first picture there, Berlin right in the middle of the Russian zone. They decided in the early conferences that they were going to split Berlin into four, which is why you can see that kind of rainbow of colour in that sea of red. So West Berlin, as it becomes, is under the control of the West. So the British, the Americans, the French, and it's surrounded by the Soviet zone. So there's East Berlin, and then there's all of East Germany in red. Do you remember the middle picture? Stalin tries to get the West out of Berlin. So they do the blockade. So you can see there they close the roads, they close the rail. They're hoping the West will go, oh, fine, whatever. If you're going to make that much of a fuss, we'll just give you all of Berlin. Instead, the West are like, absolutely not. You can't bully us like that. And they fly in all the supplies needed in the Berlin airlift. And then finally is what we were looking at last lesson, that last picture. If you remember, lots of people are using West Berlin as a way of getting out of the Soviet controlled zone. So if you're in East Germany or East Berlin, you want to leave the Soviet kind of zone. Very, very easy. Go to East Berlin, go across the border into West Berlin and fly out through there. The Soviets don't like that. Remember, it's a bit embarrassing. Everyone's leaving. They're trying to convince everyone that communism is great. Also, there's lots of spies coming in. So Khrushchev does what's called the Berlin Ultimatum. So fancy name for something really simple. He just says to the West, get out of Berlin or else. So to deal with that issue, they had the summits. Remember, we're going to remember where they are with the phrase girl cats don't purr in Vienna. That's what I came up with. You can come up with your own rhyme if you can think of something better. So just see if you can remember what those stand for. So girl cats don't purr in Vienna, Geneva, Camp David, Paris, Vienna. And if you remember, Vienna is where we left off last time, and it was really interesting. So America's got a new president. It's JFK or Kennedy. And if you remember, he's really young. He's the youngest elected president. He's also very inexperienced when it comes to politics. So Khrushchev thinks all his Christmases have come at once. He's got this American leader that's young, that's inexperienced. He thinks he can push him around. And Kennedy stands up to Khrushchev and is like, or else what? You're saying to us, get out of Berlin or else. What are you going to do about it? So Kennedy calls Khrushchev's bluff. So, because the tensions are growing, more and more East Germans, they get very unsettled. They decide now is the time to cross to the west before things get any worse. On just one day in August, 40,000 people left for the west. So 40,000 people in East Berlin and East Germany cross over that border into the west. So the East German leader, the Soviet leader in East Germany, a man called Walter Ulbricht, he gets on the phone to Khrushchev and is that we have a serious problem here. People are swarming over to the west. You've got to close that border between East Berlin and West Berlin. So on the night of 12th of August 1961, East German troops built a barbed wire fence all the way around West Berlin. So it's one night, there's no warning whatsoever. They don't tell people it's going up. And they put soldiers around the barbed wire and they're told to shoot anyone trying to cross without papers. Now, they will later develop that into a wall and we'll look at the defences. But overnight, without warning, all of a sudden you cannot get across there. So there's so many stories of families being split up. But the one that always sticks in my mind, there was a woman, she lived in West Berlin with her child. She had a really young child. Her parents were in East Berlin, and on that night she was working. Her small child was having a sleepover with the grandparents in East Berlin, and then the barbed wire fence goes up. So in the morning, she's trying to get to East Berlin to get her child, and they're like, absolutely not, no one is coming out of East Berlin. And it takes this poor mother about a year before she gets through to the authority, and they actually agree that they will release the child and let the child leave East Berlin to be with its mother in West Berlin. So they are incredibly rigid with this barbed wire fence. So overnight, no warning. It goes all the way around West Berlin. So remember from the map, West Berlin was sort of that rainbow colour in the middle of the red. All the way around the border with the red goes the Berlin Wall. So in the early stages, barbed wire fence with soldiers who will shoot you if you try to cross it. So there are some checkpoints you can see. The most famous there in the middle, Checkpoint Charlie, where people could cross with visas from West Berlin to East Berlin. So the impact the wall had on people living in Berlin, like we can't even begin to imagine. So it separated streets and it separated families. This wall is going to stay up for almost 30 years. So families are missing out on weddings, they're missing funerals, they're missing out on time with their loved ones. Later on, it becomes so much more than just a barbed wire. They build an actual wall, but then in front of it, there are watchtowers, there are guards with machine guns, there are trip wires and signal wires that set off flares. So if you try and sneak across, they call it the death strip. You try and sneak across at night, you trip the wire, you won't really know what's happening, but a secret signal will go off from the guard tower that someone's tripped the wire. There are dogs that are on the lines that run up and down the death strip. There are minefields. It's not as simple as you get your friend to just give you a leg up and you're over the wall. Otherwise, a lot more people would have done it. But that's something that people get a bit confused about. If it's just a wall, why don't you get a ladder? Around 130 people were killed trying to cross the wall in those 30 years. There are so many interesting stories. So lots of people did successfully get across the wall by being incredibly ingenious. So if I were you, go away and Google some of the ways they do that. Some of them tunnel underneath it. One family get out through zip wire. Sometimes people disguise themselves in cars, in like they take out bits of the engine. I'm not very mechanically minded, but they take out bits of the engine and they get like places that people could hide. Again, one story for you that I will never forget, and it's the most unscrupulous person. So there was this man who lived in West Berlin. He had a fiancée that he loves very, very much, as we'll see, but she's in East Berlin, and then overnight this barbed wire fence comes up and they're separated. So this man decides that he can't live without his fiancée. He's going to come up with a plan to get her out of East Berlin. So what he does, he finds this new lady, his new girlfriend, who looks incredibly like his fiance. She has no idea what's going on. As far as she's concerned, the new girlfriend, she's got a boyfriend, he's lovely, life's good. She has no idea the fiance even exists. And this man persuades his new girlfriend to go on a day trip with him to East Berlin. They'll get visas, they'll go, they'll have a look round, they'll come back. So they travel into East Berlin. He keeps hold of their passports. They're in a coffee shop. He's there, oh, just wait here for a minute. I'm just going to go get something. Then he goes, meets up with his fiancée, who comes back into West Berlin using the new girlfriend's passport. Meanwhile, the new girlfriend is sat in the coffee shop going, what a lovely boyfriend I have. I wonder where he is. Poor woman. I mean, we can't imagine what it was like. She realizes she's been abandoned there. She doesn't have a passport. She doesn't have anything to prove who she is. Her family in West Berlin, again, it takes over a year to convince the authorities of what's happened and that she genuinely is a West Berlin citizen. Horrible. What that must have done to her. So there are people who successfully get over the wall, but there are a lot of people as well who aren't successful, and they will shoot you if you try and cross it. So we can see some pictures there. So we can see the first one on the left, really sad. That's people with their grandparents. So their grandparents, you can see they're right on the border. You can see the barbed wire fence at the bottom of the picture. And you can see this is how they can communicate with their grandparents. So you get pictures of people sort of holding up babies for relatives to see, brides in their wedding dresses going and looking over the wall to show people what they look like, but they can't meet. And the middle picture there down the bottom, that's a really famous one. So that's a soldier who's been told to guide the barbed wire fence, and that small child is trying to get over it. So that's in the early stages. And then if you look at the final picture on the bottom right, that's how it ends up looking. So we can see that it's reinforced concrete. You can't just hop over the wall. You can't just get a ladder from your shed and just climb over it. And this will remain for almost 30 years. So East Berliners are now cut off. You are stuck. If you're in East Berlin, you are in the Communist East. You're not leaving. West Berliners are also afraid, and what they're afraid of is the Allies will just go, oh, this is so much effort. Why don't we just give up on Berlin? And then West Berlin would become part of the Soviet zone. And then you'd have all the hardships of being in the Soviet zone, you'd have the Stasi police, it'd be really difficult. This is a really famous case, and this really caused tension between the two. So this is a man called Peter Fechter. He's very young, he's a university student. He's trying to cross the wall when he gets shot within sight of West Berlin. So the pictures are taken of him, he's injured in West Berlin, and the Soviets just leave him there. So you can see on the left the kind of headline 55 Minuten. So 55 minutes, they just left this injured man there before he did eventually die, and they carried him away. And there was a huge backlash from the West of like, this is one of your own, this is an East German, you've shot him, you then haven't helped him in any way, you've just left him to die. What kind of people are you that would do that to this young man? So lots of criticism of the Soviets over that. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is a really interesting event that happens at Checkpoint Charlie. So that's where Checkpoint Charlie is. You can see the big sign saying you're leaving the American sector. So this is one of the crossover points between East and West Berlin. So 17th of August, West Berliners held a rally. They appealed for the US to keep troops in Berlin. They were like, don't abandon us. We don't want to come under Soviet control. Kennedy sent in more soldiers, and he makes a promise that they will not abandon Berlin. 27th of October 1961, Soviet tanks just turn up at Checkpoint Charlie and refuse to allow any more access to the east to any US officials, anyone like that. In response, the US tanks rolled up on their side of Checkpoint Charlie, and it was this really tense standoff. So for 18 hours, US and Soviet tanks, fully armed, just face one another at the checkpoint. And the world really is holding its breath of how is this going to end? One by one, though, it just ends. They move back, they move away, nothing happens. Everyone breathes a big sigh of relief. So what does this show about the two sides at this point? So they would be critical, they would be hostile, they would say horrible things about each other. They would go to the very brink, they would have tanks lined up, but they would try to avoid war because they know they've got nuclear weapons. They've seen Hiroshima, they've seen Nagasaki. Both sides actually are desperately trying to avoid an all out war. So some argue that Berlin was a useful pressure valve. It releases pressure to the powers. It became a place where spies could be exchanged across Checkpoint Charlie. Secret meetings could take place. Communication passed unofficially between the two sides. And that actually the two sides are trying to avoid a war. So Kennedy says a lovely quote there: "I'd rather have a wall than a war." So he's not in favour of the wall. He doesn't like it. He feels very bad for the people who are separated, but it's better than the alternative, which is a nuclear war. And really, Berlin calms down once the wall has been built. Both sides kind of agree: we've got West Berlin, we've got East Berlin, we're not going to try and change that. We're not going to come back to this until the late 80s, where the wall is brought down. So, as Kennedy says, it's disastrous for everyone involved, but it does stop Berlin being something that sparks a nuclear war. So, consequences. Kennedy visits Berlin. He flies in to West Berlin in 1963. He delivers a really famous speech. It's called the Ich bin ein Berliner speech. Excuse my German accent there. Which translates to "I am a Berliner." So he's saying about America's commitment to West Germany: we're not going to abandon you. We see you as one of us. So really does wonders for his image. So tough, intelligent, but also realistic. What are you going to do? You can't force the Soviets to take the wall down. It's built in their zone. There is nothing you can do about it. So you kind of have to accept it. For Khrushchev, the main thing he wants is those refugees stop. So no more East Germans flooding through to West Berlin. It also shows he was tough. So lots of the other Soviet leaders are looking at him like, so what are you going to do? You've done your ultimatum, get out or else. Kennedy's called your bluff and being like, okay, or else what? Built a wall. So the wall goes up and stays up despite criticism. His prestige goes up with the leaders in the Warsaw Pact, who sees that when the going gets tough, he's not just going to give in. So that's not praising him for what we did, because the Berlin Wall was awful. But the other Soviet leaders are like, great, this guy's got our back. He's not just going to give in to the West. So some questions just to mull over there. What were the human consequences? What were the consequences for the people of East and West Germany? What were the consequences for Khrushchev? What were the consequences for Kennedy? And what were the overall consequences for the Cold War? Okay, so have a think of those and then join us next time when we're going to look at something that really upsets America. So join us for the next lesson. We're going to be looking all about Cuba.